Hey, welcome back. This is Tim Ellis. I wanted to show you a little bit more of what I've been teaching you about drawing a large, realistic, scaled up portrait. This is basically a double-sized portrait, so it's twice the height, twice the width, which ends up being 4 times the size. And we are working from this small printout of Tom Holland, because one of my kids likes Tom Holland, and I teach this to my beginning art students. Well, actually, my advanced art students, so second-year students do this. And if you have some experience with drawing and are interested in doing a large-scale portrait, I have a couple videos that got us to this step. But what we're going to be doing today is going from a measured quick sketch, which is still simplified shapes, to actually starting to add some of the details. So we don't want to add details and make very specific shadow and highlight shapes until we know they're in the right spot. This is a mistake my beginning students make, was most people want to jump in and start drawing eyes or ears or hair or things that they're excited to draw because it's going to make it look like the drawing they want to work from. But a mistake is that if you don't know where those things are for certain, especially if you're making a large portrait where you're scaling things up, and it can be very difficult to get things right, you really want to do a quick sketch. I suggest gridding, and then from that quick sketch, measuring, making sure things are in the right spot. So let's take a look at what we've got here, and I will show you what we're talking about. So this is the large portrait that we're working towards, okay? So this isn't quite finished. I mentioned that in my beginning one. Hopefully I'll finish it with you guys. And what we're looking at, let me put this down so you can see the scale. This is double the width, double the height. So to get here, we don't want to start adding shadows and highlights and charcoal and things like that until we know they're in the right spot. And even then, sometimes you'll be working and you'll realize, oh my gosh, something's out of place. I like to use the analogy of doing a jigsaw puzzle. You know, suddenly you realize one piece that you thought was going to be in a corner, so you'd kind of slid it over there. As you're putting in other pieces, you realize it's in the wrong spot and you have to make an adjustment. So don't freak out. We've only spent about 15 to 20 minutes on this drawing so far. Let me show you what we've got so far. So we have something that is exactly double the width. You can see the grid we've made, and double the height. If you are not quite sure how to approach making a grid like this, we did that in the first 2 videos, and then we did a very, very loose, quick, simplified sketch, and then we measured that sketch to make sure everything's in the right way. We made a diagonal line for the mouth and a diagonal line for the eyes, because eyes and mouths tend to be at diagonals, and a lot of times they'll be at the same angle as each other, just depending on the camera angle. Sometimes it's not. And these are a little bit different, but pretty similar. I don't know how well you can see this line and this line, but they're pretty similar. So this is a very simplified version of this drawing. I don't have any detailed lines really. Almost all these lines will be changed, which sounds like, why in the world would you want to put in all those lines to change them? Because these lines are going to be a matrix or guidelines really for the finished drawing. So now we can start adding our details. So let's talk about that. Now, this is nothing I invented, but in modified or blind contour drawing, you are supposed to move your eye and your pencil together. So if this one on the right symbolizes my drawing pencil and the one on the left signifies my eye, they should be moving in synchronization. So if I'm moving one, I should be moving the other. What are you talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. You don't want to just try to remember what your drawing looks like and then draw it for 15 minutes and then come back and look at your reference. You want to be looking back and forth between your reference and your drawing that you're doing constantly. You really want to be looking back and forth. And as you're doing that, you want your eye and your pencil to move together. So you're not simplifying, you're actually transferring the information. Now, this is for a very realistic portrait. Obviously, if you're doing quick, gestural, fun, expressive drawing and painting, that's not what we're doing with that. But for this one, that's what we want to do. So I'm going to take my little camera away and let's take a look at how we can do this. Okay, so right here, I'm going to be working on this eye. So as I'm drawing in this eye, and you know what? I think I should zoom in for this shot a little bit. So let me zoom in. All right, we're back, and we're zoomed in. So I'm looking at this eye. Now this eye on the portrait is this eye over here. So as I am drawing over here, I want my eye to be on my paper. So I really don't want to be looking at my drawing as much as I'm looking at my image. So as you get better, you can move your eye and your pencil together. I'm going to be actually looking back and forth quite a bit. And I teach this in my beginning drawing class. So if you've never done this before, if you want to sign up for my beginning drawing class, I go through this, or you can just Google image search blind and modified contour to warm up with this. But let's go ahead and pay attention to where we are. Now, I'm going to start on my actual guideline that I've put in. And right from that, I'm going to let my eye move along this eyelid. So I'm kind of moving my pencil to show you where my eye is moving. And with a true contour drawing, you're not lifting your pencil. Now, we're not worried about that. So as I come over here, I'm actually trying to match these lines now. So I'm coming up. As it curves, I'm trying to match that curve and the downward angle. And I'm feeling like that shape looks pretty good. Now, the right-hand side of the eye, this eyeball actually leans out, which might seem a little crazy, but this is something that can absolutely happen because this is a sphere and we're not seeing the whole sphere of the eye. So as it curves, a lot of this sphere would be about this big. It's hidden because the eye is a circle, but it doesn't look like a circle here. So I'm just going to draw in this iris. The bottom is cut off. By the way, you're almost never going to see the circle of the iris or the circle of the pupil. And I'm going to grab my calipers to show you a couple things. So in the last video, I was showing how to use scaling calipers. So there's a small side and a large size, and I have this set to double right now. It's a good idea whenever you're starting to draw, just check your calipers because they can get a little out of whack, especially if they're a cheaper pair. And so right now mine are doubling pretty perfectly. So small side, big side, measure the photo with the small side, measure the actual drawing with the big side. So as I was drawing this eyeball, I noticed that it seems to be coming down a little far. So I'm actually just going to measure the height of this overall iris with the little side and then just check on the large side. Yeah, it looks a little big. So I'm actually going to go from my center line to the bottom of that iris. Should be right about here. So it's coming down a little too much. So I'm just going to make an adjustment here. That's going to change the shape of that circle of the iris. Now remember, one of the things I said my beginning students like to do is jump in on an eye. And you might be thinking, that's what you're doing. You lied to us. But what I'm really doing is I've already measured this, so I know things are pretty much in the right spot. But I have not measured every little thing, right? So I haven't drawn this part, so I'm drawing it now. That looks pretty good. Now, this space below the eye is pretty big. So I'm going to measure that. From the top to the bottom should be about this big. Now, I'm not convinced that's the right spot. We can always measure from a diagonal or from a grid line, right? So here's my grid line. Here's the bottom of that shape. So let's check that out. It's a little lower than I had it. By the way, sometimes these scaling calipers, when you have a small measurement, they don't double perfectly. So a little hack I like to do, and I showed this before, measure it here and then double it this way. So put your pencil there and then measure up. So actually my first line was correct. These aren't quite doubling perfectly. You might have a better brand. Feel free to post a link if you find better tools than I'm showing you, because I would love to pick some up myself. We can help each other, right? All right, so I'm drawing this shape below the eye. I see that there is a highlight at the top of it. Now, one of the things I'm talking about when we're drawing and putting in all these details, I'm looking at the little tear duct in the corner of the eye, is highlight and shadow shapes. So what am I talking about? Well, I just drew this shape below the eye, and then within that, there's actually a shape, and if you squint a little bit, your highlights and shadows will become more obvious. There is a shadow right here that forms a shape. There's a shadow in the corner of the eye here that forms a shape. And so we really want to try to draw those shapes in, and the more accurately we can draw them, the more realistic our drawing is going to become. Now your brain is going to think, that these shapes look weird, and it's going to want to simplify them and draw them the way you think that they should look. But don't fall for that. You really want to trust your eyes, trust your measuring tools, and draw the shapes that you're seeing. Now, this is based on a concept called right brain drawing that I love to teach because students improve just crazy amounts. And you can see I'm starting to put in these details, and it's starting to look like something. As you do that, you're going to have to, go back in and erase some things. This eraser is a little big for what I'm doing. You can pick up eraser pencils that look like this. You can sharpen the tip. They're not 100% wonderful, but they are really great for getting in little teeny areas like this where you're trying to erase something super small. Like this line was incorrect. I can't really even get in there with a pencil, but I can get in there with this pencil eraser and clean up some of these areas that were slightly off. And it's really starting to look pretty good now. Now, eyelashes are something that, as we're talking about highlight and shadow shapes, they clump up. Let me try to really zoom into the camera here. So if you look at these eyelashes, as they touch the eyelid, they become a solid object. And things like this have to get doubled on your big drawing. So we want to think of these as individual strands of hair, but don't. Look at the shapes they make. Notice they're triangles as they come up. These are actual shadows from the eyelashes. And then the eyelashes are here. They're clumping together and as they attach to the lid and becoming triangles as they move away. You might see some individual hairs, like right here, I see a couple, but they're going to form shapes and clumps. So this sounds like an ad for mascara, but we want to really draw them as we see them. So as I'm looking at the side of the eye here, I see a triangle here. I see these lashes coming out beyond the side of the face here and connecting right below this lid and actually making a triangle here and a triangle here. Now I've drawn them. Fight the urge to color things in now, because as you get farther along, you might have to make some changes. And once you start shading things in, you're going to be stuck. Now, this shape is looking small to me, so I'm just going to double check it again. So here's the bottom. 1, 2, that's correct. How about the top of that shape? So the top of that shape should be 1, 2. Okay, it's correct. So I wasn't sure, so I just double checked it. The eyelashes need to be doubled, and even this highlight in the eye needs to be doubled. Highlights and pupils in the eye are almost never the shape you would expect. This one's an oval, but it's actually got some geometry to it, and it kind of connects to this diagonal, which is the white of the eye. We say the white of the eye, but this is not white. When we go to shade it, pay attention that there's very little white in this actual printout. What I mean is, if you compare it to the white of the paper here, this is definitely gray and almost like a medium gray in the corner of the eye. Anyway, let's add a few more of these shapes. I did jump into the eye because it is fun to draw all those details right away. As I'm looking at this eyebrow, I'm kind of pointing to what I'm drawing. It curves up. It actually poofs out from the side of the head, which is what I've already drawn here. Kind of comes down and stops at about halfway across the eye. So that's one of the things, as you're drawing, we want to draw an eyebrow all the way across the eye because we think that's where it goes, but you have to draw what you see and pay attention to where it is. Once you draw something in, it's not a bad idea to just remeasure it. Now this diagonal is not 100% accurate, so I would measure, from here. So I'm measuring from my halfway point to the top of the brow. Now the most accurate way to check that is this way, 1, 2, so it's exactly right. I can also measure it with my calipers, which are actually slightly off. They're just a little bit off. Shame on the calipers. So they're not perfect, but they are pretty darn close. As I'm looking, I think this curves down a little bit more than I've got it, and I think the bottom of this brow is actually a little higher. Hard to get in here with my eraser, but not with my eraser pencil. It's really great. And then if you erase some of the wrong lines as you go, this is actually going to start to look pretty good pretty fast. I don't know if you can see what I'm getting here, but it's starting to look like his eye. And I'm also just going to refine this shape a little bit. All right, so speaking of this brow and this forehead, let's make sure this is correct. So we can always measure the corners. I'm not sure if you were here for the other videos. This is a corner where his forehead intersects. So I can measure in from the side right here. So if we're going to trust the calipers, that's telling us the corner should be there. I totally just bumped those. So let's actually measure it the more accurate way. Let's do it this way. Here's 1. Here's 2. So that is correct. I'm going to draw an arrow to where I just measured right there. Now, height-wise, we don't really know if that's correct. So let's go from the top of the page to the intersection right here. I'm going to point with my pencil to what I'm measuring to. Take your time. So measure from your edge. Here's 1. Here's 2. So it's a little higher than I had it. So here's my arrow. The corner is more right here where I'm drawing this second arrow. So I'm going to erase my first arrow. And that is where his forehead kind of comes in. Now his forehead has a transition right here where it kind of goes out and then starts heading down. So I'm just going to make an adjustment there. Erase some of this crazy mark making I've got. This part will actually become hair. I'm just going to draw some of those shapes in that I'm seeing there. We can bring his hairline here because that's where that intersection is that we were just talking about. And now I can erase some of these weird lines. And notice we're actually starting to get some shapes that look like this drawing. So I mentioned this is an intersection. Now, it's hard to find out where the heck exactly is this. A trick you can do, and I'm actually going to use my red pen for this. Now, you don't want to do this too often or it's going to be hard for you to shade. But that's where that transition is, where I just drew that red arrow. So now I can actually measure to that and locate that transition on my paper. So what am I talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. So here's how high it is. So it should be 1, 2. So it's a little higher than I've got it there. Let's draw a horizontal line there. And then how far in is it? It is right here. That is 1. So here's my mark. I'm measuring in from the side. 1, 2. So it's almost in the right spot, but it wasn't quite in the right spot. So it is like right here. So then it's just going to go in a little bit. And I'm noticing there's just a little bit of a curve out as it reaches that brow. It's not a big difference, but I don't know if you can see that that corner is a little bit more pronounced now than it was before. So you're going to do this everywhere. What you're looking to add is any highlight or shadow shape. You can see that this eye is now looking pretty great. I'm going to go ahead and delete. I'm going to erase this line, which was a guideline that we no longer need. And I'm going to try to get the bridge of the nose here and make sure that this is correct. So this is where that diagonal line can be really helpful. So I can go along my diagonal line. Always measure with your little side on your photo. Big side here. So this is telling me the bridge of the nose should be in a little more than I've got it. Now remember, we can't necessarily trust that. So let's check with our calipers. That's the double. So the calipers are telling me it's in even farther than I've drawn it. So I have the corner of this eye kind of in the wrong spot. So I need to make a slight adjustment there. And that's going to give him a little bit more leeway before his nose starts curving outward. Which is so crazy, that little difference made it look more like his eye already. Now, his eye touches the bridge of that nose almost. So I need to extend that corner of that eye in a little bit. And that's going to start to look a little more like his eye. Little differences make such a huge difference in your final drawing. One of the things I like to tell my students is realism is in the weird parts. So the weird shadow shapes and highlight shapes are what's going to make something look awesome. It's the parts that you don't want to include and your brain's going to say, don't draw that, that looks terrible. Those are the things you want to include. It's going to start to really, really, really look great. Let's get the rest of this nose in because that's going to make it look realistic. Notice I have just simplified the bottom of the nose. There's no nostril. There's no big shadow here. And noses and lips cast huge shadows. Look at this shadow below his nose. If you squint with me a little bit, notice it cuts down here and comes up. It makes a big shadow behind his nose. There's a huge shadow that connects to his brow here and comes down the side of his nose. Now there's changes in tone here, but if you squint, it becomes almost black, all of these areas, including the brow. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying drawing highlights and shadow shapes. When we shade, we're going to get these changes in tone. But right now, we just want to get the simplified shapes. But we're going to start right now. We're not worried about big shadow shapes. We want to get the contours. So we've already got the bridge of the nose right. I want to make sure the intersection of the cheek and the nose is correct. And I don't like measuring as much as I'm measuring with you right now because I'm trying to show you how to test your work. But I like working and measuring when things look wrong is what I like to do. But it can make it a little sterile when you're working, when you're measuring everything. So I would say don't worry about measuring everything right away. But if you're feeling stuck or you're feeling like something looks weird, that's really where you want to measure it. So I just measured the back of his nose as I'm talking about not measuring as much. I'm going to draw that shape in, erase this guideline that I put in. And now let's actually try to get the bottom of his nose looking like his nose. I am going to measure down from this halfway point to where that nose intersects with his face. And I'm going to trust this measurement right here. It's telling me it's right there. As I'm looking at the bridge of his nose, I can barely see that separation. That's called a lost edge, where you don't see a separation. And it's challenging to not put it in there, but we're just going to not really worry about that line so much because it's almost invisible. So if it's almost invisible, guess what? We don't really need it because it's going to become a shadow shape or a highlight shape later on. All right, let's go to this nostril. So remember, always measure with the short side. I just did it wrong for a second there. So on the photo, we're measuring on the short side. So I'm going to go from the halfway point to the nostril. And what I like to do is draw it first, fix it second. Now I just measured first, but really, the more you draw it first, measure second, is where you're going to start building those representational drawing skills because you're going to get better at it. I'm looking at the shape of this nostril. I'm not just drawing a generic oval shape. I'm really trying to look at this shape, and then I can see that there's a bottom edge here, which I've already got in. It's looking pretty good. I think that this line is a little lower than I've got it. So let's draw it first, measure it second. Here's the top shape, and I am going to put in this shadow shape now. So as I curve up right here, I see this shadow. It follows the bridge of the nose. I can actually measure later on where it crosses this line. It cuts up a little bit, cuts back. As I get to this line, it makes a triangle and goes up. And I'm squinting to really see this. And it goes up here, kind of connects to that brow somewhere, and I got lost, so I stopped drawing right there because I'm not quite sure where that is. But while we're here, notice there's a shadow shape right above his eye here. There's a line that curves up. It dents in here. It kind of curves over here. And I'm drawing in some of the highlight and shadow shapes. This is where it's really going to start to look like him and not just somebody else. Big shadow on the nose here, curves up, stops right around there. On the front, I'm seeing, I already kind of drew this once, but there's a secondary line here where the shadow becomes darker. Let's also get this shadow shape on the back of the nostril. It kind of curves around this way. I'm letting my eye and my pencil move together. I'm looking back and forth a lot, and I'm making kind of light, sketchy lines. Now, I haven't measured anything in quite a while, and that's because I'm really trying to model what I talked about. Draw it first, measure second. It becomes a little more fun that way. So notice we're really starting to get some shapes that are starting to look like our photograph. Now the lips are really not, we have not done much with those. Let's talk about lips for a second. Lips. The upper lip is almost always darker than the lower lip. And the lower lip curves outward, so it reflects light more. Now this is dark, right? But notice the upper lip is almost black, and it's got some really dramatic shape here. And also the line between the upper and lower lip has some width to it. So remember, anything that has width to it, we're going to be doubling. So as we look at this line, which is, only about this wide, that's going to be doubled here. So it's going to be a really wide line. So we've already measured to the corner of the mouth. We've measured to both corners of the mouth. So let's really start to draw this in now. So here I am. The mouth kind of follows this line, curves up to a dramatic triangle right under this shadow. That shadow shape's helping me draw the other shapes. As I go, I like to erase, after I've drawn it, I like to erase my guidelines. If you erase them beforehand, you're going to eliminate the thing you put there to kind of help you figure out where things go. Now, there's really no right and wrong with this. You know, you can try and using a different method. What I'm trying to show you is what works for me and what I teach my students. And some really fight me on erasing afterwards, because to them, they know that that other line is wrong. And it's frustrating to them. As you get more confident, you know, if that does not work for you, change it. You know, do your own thing. You really need to find what works for you. What I'm trying to teach you is what works for me and what has worked for so many of my students, many of whom have surpassed me in their pencil drawing skills, which is pretty exciting to me. Pencil drawing is not my favorite thing. Painting and sculpting are really my favorite things, but hopefully this will become something that's special to you. Okay, so I'm drawing the transition with that lip. It's going below the line here, angling up. Not a perfect set of lips, but looking pretty good. A lot of times shadows and highlights will look like something. Like to me, I don't know if you can see, this kind of looks like a dolphin or some kind of large fish. Here's the tip of the nose. Here's the tail, almost a fin here in this shadow. You know, it doesn't really matter what it looks like to you, but sometimes what something looks like, not what it is, but what it looks like, can really help you draw it. And that's kind of one of the big ideas in this whole right brain drawing thing that I'm such a proponent of. Okay, let's check out this highlight. We haven't measured anything in a while. So here's my halfway point. I'm measuring to this triangular highlight. I'm not sure if you can, how well you can see that. It's 1, 2, yeah, it's way farther back than I had it. It's all the way back here. So I'm going to draw that a little farther back. I sensed that that was in the wrong spot, and then I can erase that. So one of the things I talk about when you're drawing, if you remember when I was up here, I told you I was lost and I wasn't quite sure where this line went, was this one. If you get lost while you're drawing, just stop and go from another point, because that's going to help you get in the right spot. There's no point in adding a bunch of details where we don't know where they go. So as I started drawing this, I got lost. So now let's go from the other side. Notice we're starting to get some pretty great details in here, and it's starting to look a little bit like a real person and not just a big blob person. So let's do this eye. In the corner, right above this line, this diagonal, I'm seeing this eye come up. It curves downward. And right about now, I'm not sure that I'm in the right spot. So that's where, you know, when we feel like we're lost, go from another direction. So this line is this the droopy part of the eyelid right here. I'm going to get some eyebrow in here just so we don't get confused as to what line is what. The eyebrow cuts across this line, goes towards this droopy lid right about there, gets really close to it, but never quite touches it as it comes across. I see it continue into this shadow that we drew earlier, so let's draw that in. I'm drawing the outside shape. And when you're looking for an outside shape of something, there's going to be some shading tones in here that separate this. But right now, what we're trying to do is draw the big highlight and shadow shapes that we're seeing by squinting. And this is this brow. Notice this brow is darker than the shadow around it. But if we squint, it kind of connects to this shadow right here that is in front of the line. So I'm going to draw that in right now. It's kind of right there. All right. So let's get a few more of these lines in here, and then we'll measure and see how we did. So I'm seeing the white of the eye start right here. This is one I think I'm going to measure, because that I really want to get right. So I'm looking at the white of the eye starting right here. So I'm measuring to it. It's right there. That is 1, 2 in. And I'm measuring really carefully, because eyes, if you get the eye shape just a little bit off, it's going to make the person look a little cross-eyed, or there'll just be something funky about the angle of the eyes, and you'll just be like, it'll drive you crazy. And so we don't want you to go crazy yet, or ever really. Okay, let's draw this in. And let's get this inside corner. That inside corner is looking wrong to me. So let's go from the center line, and I'm looking to where the dark part of the eye stops, measuring really carefully on that. So let's do it. Here's 1. I made a little mark. There's 2. So that definitely is not where I thought it was. Let's double check that. When something seems wrong, measure again. Okay, that's my first one. That's my second one. Okay, the inside corner of that eye, I thought it was going to go to the right. It's actually going to go to the left. It's more here. So this is one of those areas where you have to trust your measurements. And if something looks funky, trust your measurement. What we're probably missing is a shadow or a highlight that's going to make this look complete. Notice that I'm measuring to this dark part of the eye, that's here. Then there is a light part that kind of curves out, goes behind, actually under this diagonal, connects here below the eye, curves down here and becomes this dark shadow. That is the outside of his lid, and it kind of becomes a lost edge over here. I also think this looks short to me, so let's measure that too. Let's get you back in here so we can measure. So I'm at my corner, my halfway point, and I'm measuring to the corner of the brow. That should be 1, 2. So I definitely had that low. So this lower line needs to move up. How about the higher part of the brow? The higher part of the brow is pretty small here. Let's measure that again. It's right here, 1, 2. So it's not very big. I actually had the top of the brow right, but I had the lower part of the brow wrong. All right, so we can erase this guideline because it was wrong. And let's get some of these other lines in this eye. A big one is the dark part of his iris. Now, this is a great example. It's not a circle, and it's not even really an oval. We do see a little bit of a curve, and I'm going to measure from my vertical line over to see where it is. Here's 1, here's 2, and I can look at that diagonal line, which is the same as this one that I've expanded here, and I'm looking at the overall arch of this. It doesn't curve very much. It's just a little bit. And actually on the front, I see a little bit of a highlight here. Then we have a huge oval highlight right here. Remember, that's going to be double the size. And that is a little bit square in the back and pointy over here. I've got that corner, and it's starting to look pretty good from where I am. I'm looking at my big drawing, and as I'm mentioning this, these highlights are starting to make it look a little askew. So that's something you can always look at and try to figure out later. One thing I notice is right here, this highlight should go above the halfway point a little bit, which tells me that that lid needs to scoot up just a little teeny bit. Little things like that can make a really big difference. And like I said, remember where we talked about the puzzle pieces? So I just experienced that right now. I'm going, okay, as I stand back a little bit, this highlight and this highlight are looking crooked. Now, his eyes are at an angle. I'm not talking about that, but I'm saying something is just looking a little funky, which I always say, that's great on the dance floor, but not so great on your drawing when it's supposed to be a realistic drawing. All right, let's get this diagonal in there. All right, so I'm feeling pretty good about this. I would not obsess about something looking a little funky like this right now, but I am going to put in a few more lines just to make sure it looks pretty good, so we can kind of troubleshoot this together, because this highlight being above the line and this one being so far below the line is looking a little off to me. So I'm going to measure a few things. First of all, I'm measuring from this halfway point to the bottom of his lid, and that should be 1, 2 points up. So I had the lid a little bit low there, so I'm going to fix that. And that's going to be coming up more there. And I think that this corner, actually it looks okay. I think now that I've scooted that up, it's already looking just a little bit better. This eye looks very tall and not wide enough to me. So I'm just going to check a couple things here. Let's go along our diagonal. So here's my center point. Here's my diagonal. I'm going to go to the dark part of the eye. There's 1, 2. No, that is exactly where it should be. So we're going to trust that. And then this line does continue up and really connect to this hard shadow here. So I have confidence that as we get a little farther along, it's going to look better. This corner, I'm not so sure about. So let's double check that along the line. Here's my halfway point diagonal. And I do see a little bit of a gray area here. 1, 2, where it's not really, we can't really for sure tell where that corner is. So I'm going to extend that just a little bit because it's not a hard line in there where the corner extends, and it's already starting to look a little bit better. And I am also going to get this brow up. Now, one of the things that makes him really look like him are these furrows in the brow. And we can start to add some of those shapes in. We've got this one already. I think it definitely goes higher. And these furrows, one is right here, are these big shadows. And I'm squinting to see this. There's a big triangle that kind of comes up here. I'm not shading anything in yet. And there's even a couple here. And they're kind of triangular. Remember I said, what does it look like, not what is it? It doesn't look exactly like anything to me, but it is kind of a triangle shape. Now, we haven't really talked about shapes in the ears or the eyes. We've kind of focused on the features because that tends to be where the party's at. And it really starts to get fun when you do that. But let's scoot over to this ear and kind of do the opposite. So we've already kind of got this hair shape. That looks pretty good. For the ear, notice there's kind of this shape that looks to me like kind of like a butterfly wing. So we can measure to where this corner is. We can measure to where the corner of the top of the butterfly wing is. And those things can kind of help us. But let's just kind of estimate it. So I'm seeing it here, kind of curves out, curves in a little bit. I'm seeing it cross the halfway points all the way up here. This is the diagonal line for the eyes. Here's that halfway point where it comes way up to be the kind of top of that wing. I know my hand's probably in the way as I'm drawing this. I'm trying to draw kind of at a weird angle so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, here's that part. And then I can already see that this needs to go down a little bit more than I started. All right, so this big shape is that butterfly wing shape. So now that I've kind of drawn it in, I can measure some stuff. So let's measure from halfway. It's really hard to see this halfway point, but I'm trying to show you guys where I am. Here's halfway at the top, and I'm measuring with my calipers to the bottom of that shadow. So let's trust this a little bit, because this is not something where if it's slightly off, it's going to look terrible. That's actually pretty good. So we got that pretty great. How about how far back it is? So here it is from the center line. So this is telling me that shadow should be here. That seems pretty dramatic to me, so I'm going to double check. If something seems really seriously wrong, measure it twice. There's an old woodworking adage, measure twice, cut once, because once you've cut it, if it's wood, you can't change it. With drawing, we can change it, but it'll save us a headache if something is wrong. So I was wrong. This really does cut in that much. So I'm going to make some adjustments. That tells me this line is not going to go out quite as far as I had it. And it's going to become kind of wavy gravy here. All right, that looks pretty good. Now there's a big shadow on the back of the ear right here. If I was left-handed, this would be better. I'm wondering if I scoot around like this, if you can see a little bit better. Anyway, it's going to be boring watching me complete this entire drawing, but I wanted to just get a couple of the big important shapes. Ears are kind of funnels, and they kind of spiral sound around into the center of your ear. So if you kind of look for those funnel shapes and those shadow shapes, it can help you. I also love sculpting the human form and have done so many head sculptures through the years, and ears can be really challenging to new sculptors. So if you think of them as a funnel, that can really be helpful. So I'm already feeling pretty good about this. You can see that there's a really hard edge on the back of the ear here and a hard angle here where it kind of curves in. And remember, we can measure to any of these lines. I'm not so concerned with getting these perfect yet, but I do want to get this back corner right. I don't think I have it. So let's measure from the back of the page to the corner of that ear. This is telling me that it should be right around there. Wow, I can't believe it's kind of right. So looks like it should be right about there. All right, so we're getting some of those shapes in, hooray. Now this hair looks like it's been moved a few thousand times, so let's double check that and see where that should be. So I'm gonna go from my center line to where we first see the sideburn emerge, which is almost in the right spot. It seems like it's gotta be a little bit more to the right. And where is the back of the sideburn? Where's it cross? It crosses right here on this line. So the back of the sideburn is here. So using those two lines and this diagonal, it touches the diagonal. It seems to do that. It seems to cut across here and kind of touch the top of the ear, which means I can erase all these other lines and get that sideburn a little better. I think the bottom corner goes a little bit below this diagonal right there. And that's looking pretty great. So let's do some shadows on his neck, and then let's do some shadows in his hair, and then we will probably call it quits for today. So big triangle here, I'm squinting, big kind of oval that fades to a corner here. Almost this entire side of his neck and shoulder are in shadow, and we can barely see them. So that's great. When we go to shade it, it's going to be very helpful. I'm looking at this oval shape, oval kind of here, whereas Adam's apple cuts across. It's a little bit curved there. It's helpful to know a little anatomy when you're drawing. It's not essential to get started, but if you know that inside of that chunk of his neck is an Adam's apple, you'll notice that there's a curve there that you might overlook otherwise. So knowing about what you're drawing can really inform what you're looking for. I'm not a big fan in telling people to memorize anatomy so that they can just draw without looking at a subject. I think looking at a subject is going to inform your drawings, and then you can kind of riff off of it. It's almost like being in a band playing with live bass and drums and being a guitar player, which I am. That can really make your playing so much more dynamic and exciting. Whereas if you're just working from memorized things, it's kind of like playing along to a drum machine. You can still do great stuff, but that interaction between the different parts, you and the live model or you and the photograph, become really exciting. So I'm putting in these shadows really quickly, and I just realized they're out of frame. So I'm really sorry. This is what I was just doing, is adding in these shadows. Let me adjust my camera here a little bit. All right, that should be a little bit better. So what I'm looking at are these big shadows in the neck that I just positioned here. Now I haven't measured any of this. I'm putting it in first, I'm measuring second. I notice this big shadow makes a diagonal that curves across his neck, coming all the way up to this point here. It becomes pretty blurry where I'm drawing right now, so I'm not worried about getting that part perfect, but that becomes this big, strong, angular neck that is pretty much part of what he looks like. I also want to get this diagonal where the neck is crossing the line here. Let's make sure that's right. So here's my diagonal. I'm measuring from the edge of the page to where that crosses. That should be 1, 2. I have it off. Should be coming in more. I remember measuring this ear line before. It looks like once upon a time I had this line here. So it's going to look a little bit more accurate there. Already looking a little bit more like his neck. We're getting that in. So you're going to do the same thing with any of these hard shadows. Now I see a highlight here, but I'm not really seeing a lot of shape here. I see a little bit of a curve up towards the bottom and a kind of a curve up here. If you don't see a shadow shape, don't draw it. This whole area is just dark. I do want to make sure I've got this edge right, and here I can barely even see where his shoulder crosses. So when I shade that, that's all going to kind of get lost. We're not really worried about that. But I can definitely see for certain from the bottom to where the top of his shirt intersects here, That should be 2 up here. Let's see if that is about the right height. Let's try this a little more directly below our line. That's 1. Okay, that's correct. Let's go inward too. So in from my edge to where that crease should be. So we said that the height was right. Here's 1, here's 2. That's pretty accurate. I'm actually pretty pleased with that. I do think it curves down a little bit faster than I've got, and there's a little bit of a dip right here. So let's just fix that. I think this intersection right here of his neck curves out into a little bit more of a U shape. It's kind of a heart shape. And then that was a little skinnier here. I talk about the ebb and flow of drawing a lot. You fix something, you overdo it, you have to kind of go back sometimes. And then with hair, notice this whole area is pretty much black. When I squint, I see a few little shapes here, but most of his hair is black. Now, when we shade, we're not going to make it black, but we are, when we're talking about shadow shapes, we just want to get this outside edge really accurate, and we want to get the shapes around these highlights really accurate. That's really all we need for his hair right now. We're not going to worry about getting that all perfect. I'm going to slide this down a little bit so you can see a little bit better. And let's just get some of these hair shapes. So I've already kind of drawn in this chunk right here. Is it correct? Heck, I don't know. So let's actually measure. I don't really remember how much I measured this before. So I can tell right away it's wrong because I'm measuring from the diagonal line here to this crease. It would actually be more accurate to go from my halfway point because the diagonal line it has more margin of error. So I'm going to go downward. I'm measuring halfway down to this hair. So this is telling me that's correct. But from the diagonal line here, that's telling me that the hair should start here. So that's telling me my diagonal here might have been measured slightly off. So that, remember we said we can't trust these 100%. They're for getting the angles of the mouth and everything correct. I can trust my halfway point though. So my halfway point is telling me that that's correct. So I'm going to trust it. Since it's telling me that's correct, I'm just going to double check the height of the bottom of the ear here, because before I get too much dialed in, I want to make sure that's right. Okay, that's telling me the ear needs to come a little bit lower. That's what I suspected. So as I draw that in, that ear is going to drop a little bit, which is going to also drop that shadow a little bit. Because remember, I was counting on that diagonal before. So remember we talked about the puzzle pieces? It just happened, right? We just found something that was slightly off and we're making an adjustment. So now I think that ear already looks a little bit better. And for one of my great dad jokes, when you have to move that, that can be really irritating. All right, so let's measure this negative space right here. Negative space in the hair is right there. This is not one that has to be super accurate because hair can do almost anything, right? But we want to make sure it's pretty accurate. Things that you want to really, really measure accurately are like the highlights in the eyes, the contours of the face. And I'm really trying to chunk out the diagonals I'm seeing here and the negative spaces. So negative spaces are the spaces between things that don't really take up form, but they can help us draw that. So for instance, I'm looking at the curve here on the back of his hair, and as I draw that in, I'm drawing in these little jagged shapes, and that's really helping me get this looking a little more accurate. So I see a little bit of his hair peeking out behind his ear here. So I'm going to draw that in. It's kind of curving out here. And then right below the halfway point, it kind of cuts back in under his ear here, making an appearance right there, and then kind of curving up. So we just want to get the outside shapes accurate. This is where you can let your pencil and your eye move together. Just checking to make sure I'm not out of frame again. And like I said, these shapes don't have to be as perfect, but you know, if you end up with a weird lump in your head and it starts to look weird, weird things can look weird, then you know, we might need to make a change. So I just got the back of his head shape looking pretty good. This is still pretty simplified, but I'm gonna make an adjustment here and see if we can make that a little more accurate. So here his hair seems to lean forward more than I've got it. I can measure to where this chunk of hair actually intersects this halfway point. There's a curve here where the hair separates. I'm going to draw in that negative space. I see another negative space here. Remember we said we're going to draw some of these shapes, but not every shape, and a lot of this is just going to be a big black shape. Notice it's starting to look pretty good, pretty fast. So this is where we can measure where that hair intersects. So it's right, here's my halfway point. Talking about where this curve intersects. 1, 2, that's pretty much spot on. It's a little bit higher than I had it. I'm just going to make a slight adjustment. I don't really need to do too much for that. Big chunk here. I think I made this diagonal a little too specific. And his eyes are no longer bothering me. Kind of as we started to piece these other things together, it's starting to look a lot better. Okay, let's curve down a little bit and let's just get the outside shape here. So what are we going to do with these weird highlights in the hair right there? By the way, something I like to do, just have a couple extra sharp pencils around. If you've got one, it's going to get dull pretty fast, which this one just did. So I'm going to switch to a sharp pencil. This crease is where his forehead connects to his hair. We see that that curves out. I can actually measure to how far out this really light hair is going, and I'm just drawing these outside shapes. A little trick for diagonal things too is if it's a 45-degree angle from the corner, you can measure from your corner straight out, and that's the first place I see that hair. So that hair actually comes all the way to there, which is right about here. So what I'm saying is these little hairs in the corner are coming all the way out there. And then I'm seeing an angle here. Look at the shapes. Try to get the shapes right. Kind of does that. Boy, I really don't like this eraser. It's really abrasive. I guess that's the point of an eraser, but this one is like really ripping up my paper. Big highlight here. So I'm not quite sure where this point is. So let's just look. Here's the corner of his forehead. It's kind of straight up from that. Here's the corner of his forehead. It's straight up from it is where that crease starts. This one right here. It kind of curves over. I'm seeing a big black shape that kind of arches up. I'm seeing a big curve here where there's some empty space. These are some loose pieces, and then the main part of his head is actually here. I'm seeing a big negative space curving down into a point that does this. And I'm starting to draw in some of those big hair shapes. Notice it's starting to look a little bit like his hair. Now, as you're doing it, if something looks wrong, just go back and measure it. I am going to measure a few of these lines because it's really easy to mess them up because they're just these kind of big triangles. But you can look like right here is a point on his hair. I can look below and see what that's above. If I follow it down to something it's above the iris here. So hey, that's about where I drew it. So that's looking about right. As I curve down here, it makes a negative space. I see another little curve here. Now when we shade, we're really going to get accurate with all this. Right now, we're just trying to get some of these shapes in here and try to make it look, in general, like the outside shape of his hair, which I'm pretty happy with that already. There's really not too much more we need to do. I am seeing some big chunks that kind of come off here. And there are some shapes here that I have not included that are pretty hard to see. But right here, I see a curve down. I see a chunk up. I see a big chunk out. So I can pull some of that chunk out of there. And then when I shade that, I'm going to get a little more accurate. But I do see some loose pieces kind of coming down here. I see some curvy pieces kind of connecting up here, almost like little waves. All right, so I want to show you what I've got. I want to zoom out a little bit. We've been drawing for quite a while here, so let's pause it, back up. Okay, so you can see we've got a lot of these lines in now. This is our reference. If you kind of look at the top with me, the ear, the back of the hair, look at the bottom with me, it's starting to look pretty good. So I'm going to dial a little bit of this in a little bit more maybe on the next lesson, but I'm feeling like this is a great place to be. There's definitely some shadow shapes I don't have in the cheek and things like that. I don't want you to watch me do every single part, but you're just basically looking for shadows that make shapes and highlights that make shapes. An example of a highlight that makes a shape would be the shapes in the eyes, the highlights in the eyes, the highlights below the lip. But we've gone from something that looked kind of like nothing to something that's looking like something. Now, when we shade this, just to show you where we're going, notice now we're not too far from this. And we can actually see some of these shapes that become shadows later on. So that's what we're doing. Okay, we're back. So if you enjoyed this lesson, please subscribe, hit like. If you hit the little bell down below, you'll subscribe and that'll let you know when I post new stuff. I'm trying to do a new video every week, so trying to keep that up. So if you support by subscribing and hitting like and sharing, it'll make it a lot easier for me to keep that. So please do support the channel. And if you have comments or questions, please put them below. And I do teach a full length, like almost 50 hours of drawing from where you don't really need to know anything about drawing realistically to being able to draw a pretty realistic portrait. So if this is a little over your head, or you just want a refresher, or you'd like to be able to have some crazy progress, you can go to my website, which I will link below as well. And if you sign up for my mailing list, you can try out some free lessons, see if it's your speed. If you've just watched this lesson, you already know if you like my teaching style or not. And you can sign up for my drawing class if that sounds like something you'd like to do. All right. So thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you learned something new today, or at least just had some fun following along. Bye-bye.